Welcome to everybody in the chat. Welcome to folks online and folks that'll be tuning in later. I'm really excited about RevGenius. This is my first RevGenius, so this is going to be my inaugural event. Really excited to meet with all of you, as well as share some stories of success and our experiences here in the industry. Really excited to learn about what Aseem's been doing with his company and learn more about his background and how it applies. So without further ado, let's jump right into introductions. I'll go first, Aseem, and then I'll pass it to you, and then we'll jump right into our discourse. So Amahl Williams, partner at Reveal Group. I've been in the RPA industry for a little over 4 years. Overall, 20 years of sales and marketing experience. In my current role, I'm doing operating model, I'm doing transformation, and I'm also doing data and analytics for my company, my clients, and my partners. Aseem, feel free to go next.
Thank you, Amahl, and pleasure to reconnect. Also, my first RevCon. I think it is the first one that they're doing. I don't think they had one last year, but it's great to be here. It's great to meet with the folks on the call here today. So some background on me. I started out in the enterprise applications and the technology industry many moons ago. I dare not count. Worked at Oracle for the better part of a decade in enterprise apps, building out new products, new technologies. Participated in some key acquisitions like Siebel and PeopleSoft, et cetera, back in the day. Left there to join Omniture, which really was one of the early companies to focus on big data and in the marketing domain in particular. So that was a pretty exciting part of the career journey where I was one of the early execs at Omniture, and then we exited that business to Adobe for $1.8 billion a couple of years later, and I stayed with the new business unit inside of Adobe for the next 10 years, and we grew that to a $3 billion business. I ran all of go-to-market for the marketing cloud category there at Adobe. And then more recently, earlier this year, in the middle of a pandemic, decided it was time to start something on my own. And so we founded Immersa. And our focus is, of course, on how do we bring data intelligence to everyone inside the organization. In particular, we're focused on RevOps. We'll obviously talk a lot more about that as we go through this.
All right, perfect. Awesome. So let's jump right into it, Aseem, and let's make sure we get a proper grounding before we start our conversation. So for the newly indoctrinated, what is our working definition of revenue operations or RevOps, as you understand it?
Yeah, no, great question. And look, I think the way I look at it is traditionally RevOps has been really focused on making sure that the operations inside of the sales teams are working well. But over time, that definition has evolved. And in particular, over the last few years, we've seen just a massive explosion in the value of this role. And it's tied directly to how data has become so much more relevant and important in how companies run their business. So today I look at RevOps and say, well, first of all, it's connecting the dot across all revenue-facing functions. So you look across sales, marketing, service, and support. Each one of those teams are interacting with their customers in some way. How do you connect the dots across that entire customer journey? I think that's one of the key reasons why revenue operations was established as a function in the first place. And then second, I actually think that there's a very big shift over the last few years where we're moving from simply providing insights to actually driving actionability with our sales teams and with our customer-facing teams. I think that's a pretty significant shift in the way that RevOps is now perceived. It's not enough to just show visualizations of your data, but also to then translate that into how do you actually drive actions with your data. And we've actually done a fair amount of work and research in this area, which we're happy to share. But those are kind of the two key things that we see shifting them all. And I'd love to hear your perspective too.
So, Aseem, let me kind of boil it down without draining my entire background in sales, because I started off as contact center sales for Verizon right out of school. So, I was staring at the dashboards. I knew my call counts. I had my call scores for upsell, cross-sell, and all the fun stuff. So, trial by fire, invaluable experience, because coming full circle into transformation, I'm now working with the companies that I used to work for, doing transformation in those specific functions. So personally, the RevOps function here at Reveal Group did not exist before I started. So when I met Paula and Ian here at Reveal Group, one of my first executive tantrums was, we need RevOps, please. I want us to be successful. And I was fortunate enough to work with one of the best RevOps professionals that I've met, throughout my career. Her name is Morgan. She leads North American RevOps, and eventually she'll expand the practice across our global footprint. So for me, RevOps was go to market internally around the best practices for me, I wanted to shorten the sales cycle. I wanted to increase customer lifetime value, right? Similar pain points. But I also wanted there to be a common understanding of what is across sales, marketing, and product when we had conversations. So why are we doing this? What are we doing? And how are we going to measure the success of what has been done? So it's early days RevOps here. The team is not fully blown and expanded, but I'll tell you, Aseem, when you come to a company that's product previously, so executive team, executive referral, first 10 million, it's all of our relationships. Fly to New York, fly to Chicago, fly to DC. But as you try to scale past either 100 employee or 10 million mark, you need RevOps to be that common voice of truth throughout your organization. So product wants to prioritize something else. RevOps pulls them back in and says, hey, by the way, these are the campaigns that we're focused on. This is your contribution that we need to help reduce sales cycle. Yeah. Marketing wants to start new engagement and alliance. That alliance is not one of our top 3 investment themes for the upcoming year. RevOps comes back in and says, please, this is exciting, but let's make sure that we keep aware with our priorities. Sales, and this is my favorite part, in the pre-sales process, my RevOps folks are experts at customer success, sales enablement use cases, and then having that really tough conversation around the pipeline for aging status. Is it really at this stage of sales engagement, and how do we know? Does that make sense, Aseem?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think it's very interesting. A couple of observations based on what you just talked through. First, if I look back the last 10, 12 years and how the role of RevOps and how it's perceived has changed. It used to be where RevOps was perceived as essentially a grain on the margin of the sales team. and it's simply like, give me reports and I'm good. And if you can get me some leads, even better. That was the conversation I remember having with sales ops teams and so on in my early years in this tech career. And then over time, it's become so much more strategic. And the conversation now is about how do you actually help improve the productivity of every sales team, every sales rep in the team, and what's the overall impact on sales productivity? So once we shifted the lens from, this is simply cost and a drain of margin to how does this actually lead to improvement in productivity of the sales team, and we can measure that. That's highly measurable. Then the conversation changes. Then the way that you approach the function changes. Then the way that how strategic it is to the business completely changes. So that was kind of one of the shifts that I've noticed over the years that I think looks and feels very similar to what you're describing in your career, in your path with Reveal Group.
So it's interesting to see, I always argued that we should hire VP of marketing before we hire VP of sales. And, I pick those fights all the time. Hey, but you described sales operations in the working definition. I was like, hey, that's business development. Marketing owns that if you're small. But I am glad that it has evolved. And I'll tell you, as I'm not a sales leader anymore. I'm probably more implementation specialist now, I would say. What used to drive me nuts is if I had 10 sales reps answer an RFP, every single deliverable looked fundamentally different. So I like the centralization, I like the standardization, and I like the uniformity to best practice. So I really appreciate that part of it. That's one of my favorite pain alleviations of the RevOps function here at Reveal Group. So second, how does RevOps evolve in product-led growth companies? Now, you introduced me to the term. I did my homework last night. But talk to me about how it matures, right? Some frameworks and, your point of view as the company.
Yeah. It is a wonderful topic to talk about. I'm very passionate about product-led growth. And it is, of course, more fashionable to talk about it now, but there's some pretty fundamental reasons why this is important. So there's research out there that we've seen that shows how PLG companies, product-led growth companies, generate almost 2x the value in terms of market cap, in terms of investor value, in terms of customer value over the same time frame compared to traditional SaaS companies. And that, to me, is very interesting. The second observation there is that PLG companies tend to start out slow, but once the once the motion really kicks in, and it's typically around that 10 million or plus mark, they tend to scale and continue to scale faster compared to their peer group for a much longer period of time. So examples of this, we saw in the early days with Dropbox, and then we saw with more recently companies like Calendly, and in between you've got Twilio and Asana and Atlassian and many others, where really it's the product that helps drive the sale, and the power has shifted from buying executive to the end user. So the end user simply signs up to use your product, and then if she likes what she sees there, if she gets value out of it right away, then she can be an advocate on your behalf and recommend it to others. So when you have a sales motion like that, which is becoming a lot of tech companies that we talk to are exploring this kind of sales motion. The question I've been asking is, how does the role of revenue operations evolve in this context, right? So that's sort of where we started thinking about this, and I think there's some really fascinating implications for B2B selling over the next few years as this starts to take much greater emphasis.
So, I'm a massive fan. I would also call myself a stan of Calendly. I think two parts. One, because it actually helps me and I'm slavish to it. So usually I either try to bring it into a company and they're like, no, Amahl, let's use this Microsoft product. Or once I bring it in, they're like, hey, why haven't we been using this before? And I always joke in my industry, Aseem, I say, listen, guys, we're in the automation industry. So instead of exchanging 6 emails, let's use, best-in-class application. So let's kind of move a little bit further down from a maturity framework and standpoint. And let's talk about the role of RevOps and its impact on cost of acquisition, everybody's favorite term. So what do you think, Aseem?
Yeah, I mean, look, first, let's be clear on what that cost of acquisition really means. So it's obviously the sales and marketing costs. But there tends to be a lot more associated to it in terms of your website content, your publications, your publishing costs, et cetera. And then kind of translating that into how much does it cost you to acquire each customer. I think that metric is just incredibly important in terms of thinking about how you're going to continue to scale your business. So when you think about it from companies that do well are the ones that have figured out how to lower their cost of acquisition and then be able to do that continually at scale. And then again, investors look at it very closely too, because if you spend $1,000 to acquire 10 customers versus 100 customers, it's a completely different equation. It changes the way that you go to market. It changes the way that you sell. And so I think there's a lot to unpack there. And the metric in of itself is obviously very relevant. But then when you start to sort of think about it in terms of ratios of LTV to or lifetime value to CAC, then it really uncovers some very interesting opportunities for optimization inside of a business. So I think those are really important metrics, which what we see typically is most companies track those metrics, but it's only for executive use.
Right.
And we question, why would you not have every sales rep, every employee, every customer-facing employee have access to some of the same metrics and translate those into metrics that are relevant to them, like what they use to track their productivity day to day, so you can show the tie between your activity and what the metrics are that actually move the needle for the entire business.
No, great points there. It's always interesting to me because I always, whenever I join an organization, depending on size, I want to say, do we have a common understanding of what success is, right? Yeah. So I don't want to be pouring champagne when somebody else is having water. And I like that theme because I do believe that in franchised employees, I know we have the great resignation happening right now during the pandemic. That number is staggering to me. 48% is a savage number. But I do believe that in franchised employees, when they have transparent access to the organization, they challenge themselves. We have that here, right? My senior management team here is the most impressive senior management team that I've worked with. They all have a common understanding of our success. We get constant feedback from the executive layer, and we're working towards common goals. And what happens there from a cultural standpoint is it's, let me avoid the bad projects. It's like the project can only be good if we collaborate, learn, and grow together. So I'm really excited about that. Let's move on to this one and pivot because we have about 4 minutes left. And I don't want to miss the close. So I'm going to drop one question, but let's focus on this one from 2 points of view. So what are 3 things you have to get right from a RevOps perspective under 10 million? So your first 10 million, right? The hardest 10 million ever. And then after 10 million, what are the 3 things that you have to get right from RevOps perspective?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and we think about it a lot because I've been on both sides of that number. I've actually been on both sides of the $1 billion number as well, and so the things change pretty dramatically as we go through it. I think there are. I'm going to focus on things that actually stay consistent regardless of which side of that number you're on.
Okay.
I think the first is having a very clear definition of who you're targeting, who's your ICP or ideal customer profile. If you get that, if you don't have clarity around that, regardless of the scale that you're at, you're not going to keep moving forward. I mean, that's one of the things that we fundamentally believe is critical. Second is just having absolute clarity on where to go find your customers, and that's one where we as a startup are constantly learning, constantly experimenting. We try different channels. Some people like to be approached on LinkedIn. Some like to be approached over email. Others still prefer voice calls. So it just varies quite a bit. And so if you're going to continue to grow your business, you need to find those leads. You have to be clear on what that looks like on both ends. And then I think the thing that actually changes pretty dramatically as you scale past that 10 million mark, or as you continue to scale, is the shift to process orientation. And just sort of in the early days, you can get away a little bit with shooting from the hip and get things rolling. But very quickly, you realize that if you're going to scale at all, that you've got to have a very process-driven mindset where you're constantly experimenting with different approaches. You're looking at the data, you're testing the data, and then you continue to scale your processes based on that. So my 2 cents, but again, I would love to hear your view. I think you might have something to add to that.
So, twofold, Aseem. Again, you're speaking to things that, speak to my heart. I literally had a client call right before this, and what they said to me, they're a care provider, but childcare services provider, not only for B2B companies, but also for B2C, domestically and abroad. And what she said to me is, she's like, Amahl, she's like, we've grown as a company, but our processes didn't. And I go, man, I can't wait to talk to you again, because guess what robots do?
Yeah.
So for clients, resonates with me 100%. As a user, process documentation is part of the value that we bring to the organization, right? So my RevOps leader, she understands how I think. I document as much as I can, right? Because your deliverable from your engagements, internal or external, is the notes that you take, kind of how we went back and forth. Now, the ones I gave you, Aseem, today, that's, back of napkin, we hung out at the bar, maybe had some tea.
Yeah.
Internally, I not only want to talk about what we're capturing, but who's going to own the process documentation kind of going forward. So if we are going to do it, let's make sure that somebody can do it after we've done it once and kind of save the time. So what I like in onboarding is sharing that information. So we got a quick close here. Sorry, Aseem, I got near the end. Sure. What's the call to action for folks in the industry? What do you want them to focus on or take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, look, you mentioned your process orientation. Our focus is on we're building essentially a data process automation platform at immersa.co. Check us out. And the idea is really simple. We want everybody to think in terms of how you can use data to drive actionability. And to that end, we want you to engage with us, have a conversation with us, and tell us what you're thinking so we can learn through that process and collectively move the industry forward. For the RevCon audience today, we are extending our early adopter program specifically. So if you mention that program, we'll have you join our early adopter program ahead of time. So look forward to engaging with you. Thank you.